Welcome to the second episode of What in the Health with your co-hosts Eric, Rena, and Fatiha. After a brief hiatus, we're really excited to present our second episode, Stress, Social Media, and Self-Care. Today, we're going to be talking about mental health problems faced by college students with William Nation, a doctoral intern at the Johns Hopkins Counseling Center. Because of Will's experience at a college counseling center, we wanted to use this opportunity to reflect on the mental health experiences of college students to better understand how students can develop healthy habits and behaviors to preserve their mental health. We delve into our own experiences with stress, social media, and self-care to better understand Will's expert opinions.
Stress is something that we all experience at some point in our lives, especially in college. As college students, there are many sources of stress in our lives. Heavy academic workloads, novel social circumstances, and daunting future prospects all contribute to a culture of stress. Stress culture is something that we personally have experienced here at Hopkins, and we imagine is prevalent in most universities.
We asked Will about his opinion on stress culture on college campuses. Here's what he had to say about a common mindset behind a stress culture.
One of the things that gets really incentivized in, undergrad, grad school is this sort of like race to the finish. You got to get everything done. You're on this compressed timeline. And the world doesn't always work that way. And so eventually that's going to change. And that might be something we're thinking about of you're not just doing this until you get to the good part of your life, right? This is a part of your life and you have to make it a life worth living.
Another good point Will made was that we have the tendency to worry about things that we cannot control. Here's what he said.
At some point, you have to resign yourself to that a little bit, and not to say that you can't make it different, but you also can't go around thinking that like everything is within your control. And if you could just work harder, that it would be different, because sometimes that's just not the case.
I really resonated with when Will was talking about how a lot of students often see undergrad or grad school as like this waiting period to your real life. And I feel like part of the reason why this mindset is so prevalent is because college is almost advertised to us in that way from really young age, right? Like we're conditioned to believe college is a means to an end to, this great future and an incredibly fulfilling career. And I think from my perspective, right, I'm a first generation low income college student. College was always advertised as like this gateway to the life that you could be living that you're not living right now. So often whenever things in college get stressful, it's almost like, oh, well, I'm signing up for this to have a better future for tomorrow. But it's interesting because not only is that tomorrow not promised, but that today that you're living right now, you have to stop yourself from being excessively miserable and unhappy, because I feel like it's so easy to make that a precedent in your life and never let go of that mindset that tomorrow will be better. And I don't know if either of you can relate to that point in any capacity.
Yeah, so I really resonate with that too because, in Hopkins, we have a lot of pre-professional students. We have a extremely large population of pre-meds, myself included, that really feel like college is just not a part of your life. Like your life doesn't begin until you become a doctor or a lawyer or whatever. And that's what, like 10, 15 years from now. So it's so easy to just kind of put your life aside until that point, and then you never reach like this final end that you're satisfied with. And I think it's so common to see other, pre-professional students, myself, trying to control every single aspect of our lives, because we feel like everything we do matters so much. Like we have to be perfect. We have to fit this particular mold of what a perfect student is. And if we stray away from that just a little bit, then, oh no, our life is over. I feel like that's such a common mindset, and it can really contribute to stress cultures in universities.
Yeah, and I think it's important that we make this explicit connection to stress culture, because I don't think Will necessarily did that, but we're framing it that way. And I think it's true because a lot of the reasons we're able to, or other students, hopefully not us, are able to justify stressing themselves out, sacrificing sleep, sacrificing their sanity, is because they can keep saying, oh, it'll be worth it in the end. It'll be worth it once I'm a doctor. It'll be worth it once I get into the grad school of my dreams, or it'll be worth it once my GPA is here. And it's become this accepted part. Yeah, like this part of my life doesn't matter because it's worth sacrificing for the rest. But it's really destructive, especially some of those things like losing sleep. Like that has lasting effects. You're going to be, damn it, you're not doing your physical health any favors by doing that. And so it's not just, worth it in the end when there's so much you could be doing for yourself right now that you're just not.
Yeah, losing sleep is a great point because I feel like that's something that we all like tell each other, and then it becomes a sort of competition, and we don't know why it's a competition. Like, oh, I only got 3 hours of sleep. 3 hours? I wish I got 3 hours of sleep. I only got one. Like, that happens all the time, and it's not even just with sleep. It's with everything, and I feel like that's a huge part of stress culture that um is something that maybe isn't talked about a lot, but it's definitely a huge contributor.
Yeah. And I think it's important that we talk about this kind of self-fulfilling loop, this kind of echo chamber of the fact that all of us at this college that live in this stress culture are just other college students, right? Who are sacrificing their lives for the future. That's how they view it. And the people who have realized that that's not worth it tend to be the people who have left college and are in their careers and realize now it wasn't worth it. They're not at the college to tell people it's not worth it. The culture just kind of keeps going because people graduate and then new people come in who just take on the same practices that are harmful. And then when those people do come back and tell people that it's not worth it, the people don't listen. We've had this conversation between the three of us. Sometimes there are events with speakers and they'll talk about their undergrad experience and how it helped them, maybe how it didn't. And a lot of students will either just look at them as maybe an exception or maybe say, oh, that can't work for me. And it's a problem because nothing will change if people aren't willing to kind of change and actually take maybe this advice.
Yeah, I'm so guilty of that, right? Like I'll find upperclassmen telling me like, I'll share things that I'm stressed about in the moment and have an upperclassman tell me, Fatiha, in the long run, these aren't things that really affect maybe grad school applications or even like your experience at Hopkins, although it's super stressful now. Like I promised you, I've been through something similar and I'm fine. And my gut reaction is to be like, okay, but you're not me. And I always am, it's so easy for me to jump to like the worst case scenario and not like take that advice. And I get it that it's a really hard process to kind of rationalize other people's experience relative to your own. But for me, a really interesting quote that I heard last week, I was in this panel with Sir Michael Marmot, and he was talking about how society will reward success, whatever, kind of academic success, professional success, whatever you're looking at. And when it comes to failures or even like movements away from this track, society will kind of always shift the blame on the person itself as like, you didn't try hard enough or you made this mistake. And I could see how that framework of how we perceive success and failure is so intricately linked to this aspect of control that Will was saying, right? Because if failure is portrayed as something that's my fault, of course I'm going to want to control every little detail to make sure I'm not bringing failure upon myself. And thinking about how realistically you just can't control everything in your life, it shows you this kind of synergistic effect between your need for control, your fears for failure, and then adding on to this overall stress culture where, you could easily be pulled into like this current of I need to bring as much misery into my life as possible in order to prove to myself that I'm trying my best, right? Like that brings me to another point is freshman year, and a little bit of first semester sophomore year, it almost felt like I wasn't trying enough if I wasn't miserable. And that was the worst mentality I could have had for myself as a student, because if I was relaxed while I was studying or if I was happy, I was like, oh, well, I'm not super stressed out. I guess I'm like slacking right now. And that's so crazy because, when I think about those moments now, I'm like, you're a human. You're allowed to like walk outside for 30 minutes or like sit down and eat lunch and scroll through Instagram. Like it's not a bad thing.
Yeah, it especially is so bad when other people are telling you that you're not trying hard enough when they themselves don't even know what you're going through. Like I get this all the time, like as a pre-med, right? Like, oh, I'm really stressed. This semester is really overwhelming. And then I'll have people tell me like, oh, well, if you can't handle undergrad, there's no way you're going to handle med school. Like, this is how life is as a pre-med or whatever, right? I hear that all the time. I feel like we're so influenced by people who have no idea what we're going through. And then we are so, we fall into this belief that, oh, okay, like this person doesn't think I'm doing enough, so I must not be good enough. And that can be really damaging to your self-esteem.
Yeah. And I think in the discussion, something that has been kind of underlying it, but not explicitly mentioned, is kind of these values. Like, what do you value for yourself? Fatia has been mentioning success a lot. Rena, you were just talking about other people's view of you. If you are someone who, values getting a job with like a lot of money, or like really high respectable job, and you're not willing to compromise on some of these things, if your priorities are solely in some of these things, in like this pursuit of money, this pursuit of, I don't know, this very narrow definition of success, I'll say, then you're not even going to listen to our advice, whatever we talk about here, whatever Will says here. You're going to be stuck in your ways if that's what you want, because the reality is that is the way to get those values. If you want to achieve that definition of success, then you do have to kill yourself. You do have to spend all this time just punishing yourself and trying harder and being stressed, because those things aren't easy to achieve. They're not always realistic for people to achieve. But if you value things like your happiness, your health, things that you want to do in your life, maybe creatively, then you can work your priorities so that you still can achieve success. You can still have a comfortable salary. You can still have a respectable job, but you'll also be, happier. You'll also be enjoying your time now and your time later. These things are realistic if you are able to shift your priorities around a little bit and maybe widen and broaden your definition of success and what you value in it.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. And I think being honest with yourself and really reflecting on what your core values are, it can be hard to do, because at least from my perspective, right, personally, I find it so easy to make excuses for myself of why I can or can't pursue a value or pursue a goal. And, going back to like personal experiences, when I thought of success growing up, it was always about financial stability, right? Like you wanted a career that paid you as much money as possible, because that's what would give you all these other aspects of comfort, or else you wouldn't be happy in life. And I see the value in that ideology and that mentality even now, because I can see the effects of like having money and not having money. But I think it took me a while to get to a belief where I was like, yes, financial stability is important, but it's not important enough for me to sacrifice my mental health, short term or long term. And that understanding of that balance of what worked for me was really challenging, because in the process I'd be like, okay, but if I preserve my mental health, does this mean I'm not going to push myself as hard? Or does this mean I'm going to, not take up opportunities because I don't want to? Am I being lazy? Like just that internal conflict was so hard to get out of. And it's still like this aspect of my life, right? But I guess when it comes to figuring out what your core values are, Eric, you have any suggestions maybe on like, are there things you've tried?
I mean, I think it's hard. It takes a lot of self-reflection. And I would say it takes a lot of experimentation. I think you need to, like you were saying, Fatia, figure out what works for you and what doesn't. I think a lot of people, especially at Hopkins, will push themselves really hard academically because they feel like they need to. They feel like if they're not going crazy over this class, they're going to get a bad grade, right? But the thing is, they never try to relax a little bit. They never see what happens if they study just a little bit less for a test. If they just take it a little bit slower, they might still turn out with an A. Maybe they'll get an A minus. Maybe they're satisfied with that. Maybe they're not. Maybe they do want to keep trying harder. But I think it really takes a lot of trial and error, especially at this point in our lives. We're still, very young and we have a lot to figure out. And so I would say, yeah, try these things out. Say, am I happy? Am I satisfied with my life right now? Am I satisfied with the way my life is going? And it's hard because you don't know where it's going in a lot of ways, but it's just a lot of reflection, a lot of experimentation. And over time, by trial and error, you will have errors. I think we can't forget that just because something tries and fails doesn't mean it was a waste of time. Over time, you'll figure things out and you'll figure out, what you want to do, what you want your life to be like, and how you can fit your health and your well-being into whatever definition of success you have.
I think it's also important to take what other people say with a grain of salt, because so many people can tell you should do this and this to be successful, but their definition of success is not going to be your definition of success. And then speaking of comparing yourself to others, I think this is a great time to kind of segue into social media, which is a huge source of mental health issues for a lot of people, not only college students.
Yeah, definitely. I think we can all agree that social media is a really large contributor to sustaining stress culture just because it's so curated and often overwhelming if you're not instilling boundaries while using it, right? So we talked to Will about how social media contributes to mental health distress, and he had some really interesting points about how we can perceive and ultimately use social media.
He first mentioned some aspects of social media that we don't always realize are impacting us so negatively. First, he comments on the superficial nature of our social media content.
Let's be honest, like a lot of people put this very curated, very perfect version of their life out on social media. And the problem is that maybe you don't know that that's fake, or you don't know that that's not as real as your life is. Like maybe they also do the things that you do in your life, but the picture is that they don't.
Secondly, he talked about the false sense of connection we develop from following or liking people's content.
Like you're connected to these people, but you're not. Because like we all have those people, right, that we like their stuff, or we sort of interact with them, but don't. And that can lead to people feeling very isolated because you have all these people around, but it's like sort of like being alone in a crowded room. And so then you have these outcomes that you're like, but I'm always talking to people. Why do I feel sad?
The idea that social media is curated, like, people often say like this reel of perfection, right? It should feel like common sense, and it probably is common sense, but I swear there are times when I'm like scrolling through an Instagram feed and it doesn't click.
I think it's so true, though. I think if I reflect on the way I would use social media back in high school, I would post probably about like once a month, just post a picture of me with some friends or something. And if you're looking at that, you're like, wow, look, he's always hanging out with friends. He's always like with people, always at parties, at events, whatever. But like, I don't know, I would go out like once a month and then make sure I take a picture at the event so I could post it. And it's like, it's very curated. And I wouldn't blame people for curating. Like, why would I put my bad pictures on social media? It's more about the way we use it, the way we perceive it, and recognizing that it really doesn't mean anything beyond what's right there. Oh, they're out with their friends. Wow, good for them. There doesn't have to be any comparison to yourself. There doesn't have to be any judgment about that person's life. It's really just a place to share pictures, or at least that's Instagram. Other websites, just sharing thoughts, sharing tweets, whatever it is.
Yeah, I mean, you were mentioning a point that was super interesting. You were saying, I don't blame anybody for posting curated pictures. Like I wouldn't want to post bad pictures. And that it brought up this topic of social media etiquette for me, right? Like how it's so crazy that over the span of like 10, 15 years, we made up so many rules, such arbitrary rules about like, oh, you're only considered a popular person if you have like an X amount of followers and above, or you need to engage with your followers by posting pictures like this. And, if you want to be this like perfect popular person, you can't do airbrushed, pictures. Like if you want to connect with the audience, you have to have unfiltered images of your life. And there's all these little rules. And I feel like day by day, it's getting a little bit more complicated and it's putting me in a deeper crisis.
I'm glad you brought up the numbers because I feel like that's so easy to compare because it's just right there and you can see the numbers change, right? The number of followers you have, the number of likes you have. And I tell myself that none of this matters because it doesn't. But at the end of the day, I'm like, oh, this number is not what I want it to be. And then it can really put you down. And I feel like a lot of people can relate to that.
I think it relates because when Will had this discussion about, followers and these false connections, it just struck me because when we think about like that number of followers, like what does it mean? Like it doesn't mean like number of friends, that's for sure. Because I scroll through my feed and I'm like, have I ever even talked to you like once? Maybe, I don't know. And it's just so true. Like, what do these numbers mean? What do likes mean? Like half the time I'm scrolling through, I'm just liking whatever I see. It doesn't really mean much. And yet these numbers, like you're saying, are right there. They're right there for comparison. They're there for judgment. It's hard, and everyone can see them, not just you. And that's scary too. It's really, social media can be really scary to use because it's so public and you're putting yourself out there. You're being vulnerable. You're saying, I want to show you this. And if people don't like it, that's hard. That's hard to take because like you're saying, not only do your friends see it, but random people that happen to follow you also see it.
Yeah. And it's like, I feel like the numbers are almost an ego boost or this like tool for validity, right? Like, I think that's what often these numbers are marketed as, is if you're getting thousands of likes or if you have millions of followers like a celebrity would, it legitimizes a belief for a lot of people that, oh, I am popular, I am worth it. And I think it's so dangerous when people take these numbers and attach it to their self-worth because people forget that these numbers are just so arbitrary, right? Like Instagram could change tomorrow to not using numbers for likes and using like, I don't know, the alphabet. Like how many like likes of the letter F do you have? I don't know, something super random. But even then, you could easily change it to make this a system attached to your self-worth. And I feel like a lot of people forget that the algorithm behind a lot of these social media platforms make it so that you get warped into this cycle of validation and likes and stuff, right? Like they make it super addictive and super popular for you to spend hours on it. And I think just having that consciousness really shifts the value that social media has. And, that goes out of our expertise with like digital privacy and security and stuff. But I don't know. I just find it a really interesting thing to think about is that they want us to be like this to an extent, one could argue. Although social media can very easily become a toxic habit for some people, it also has its benefits. And I think Will made a really interesting point about how to positively use social media.
Find a way that using social media works for you, and then practice figuring out what that is. So for some people, it's using it differently. For some people, it's using it not at all, or at least much more sparingly than you used to. And I don't think there's a wrong answer per se, but there has to be a way that it's useful and fits into your life rather than sort of takes it over.
I really liked Will's quote here because it makes you think like, why am I on social media in the first place, right? Like I am on social media to connect with my friends. I feel like, all social media came from that central idea, right? It's like to help people connect with friends and to speak to people around the world and learn about other people. But now social media is slowly becoming this like shopping website. Oh my God, the Instagram shopping tab. I lose my mind over that every time I open Instagram. Even like LinkedIn has ads now, right? So like you have to really see what your priorities are and say, okay, I'm using social media to speak to my friends. Who are my friends? That's something you have to ask yourself too, because as Will mentioned, followers is not equal to connections. So yeah, I really like this. It requires a lot of self-reflection and just training yourself, like what you really want out of this.
Yeah, and I think it can be hard to do, but I think sometimes it can require you to kind of take different steps. Maybe deleting your account, starting a new account where you only follow your friends, maybe blocking certain people, unfollowing a ton of people. These can be kind of stressful because a lot of them you can't necessarily like just redo necessarily. Like if you follow someone back again, they're going to know that you unfollowed them, like all these things. But again, it's really about what you prioritize. If you, like you said, if you're just there to share things with your friends, then why are you following all these other people? Why are you spending your time browsing, the explore page all day? I think thinking about what you want out of the app is a great way to start figuring out if there's a way that you can use it that works for you.
Yeah, and I think just that mindfulness, and again, being honest with yourself and reflecting on why you're on social media, I feel like it helps you figure out the type of content you want to see too, right? Like, I think sometimes because content creation is such a fast growing space, especially right now, it's easy to be sucked into content that you're actually not interested in. But because it's popular, you almost feel like you have to expose yourself to it and see it all the time when you don't. And I just feel like so many of the things that we're talking about may seem like a given and may seem very intuitive at the surface. But then you think about all the issues and problems people are facing specifically because of all these like topics that we're talking about. And it's crazy how something that may seem very intuitive is such a deep internal struggle for so many people, like including ourselves in various capacities. It's always mind-blowing to me.
Yeah, it's especially challenging because there's no right or wrong way to do this. And it's not like every single thing on social media is bad. You just have to realize what makes you feel bad at the end of the day and what doesn't. And yeah, I think that just takes a lot of practice and also just recognizing like what types of content that are out there that you don't like and just trying to filter that out of your daily life. Because if you, for some reason, you don't like seeing memes all day because it takes up, you know, 6 hours of your day, then like, that's something that you can act on immediately. And just like catching on these trends, I think is one way to go about this because it is really hard to just say, oh, cut out all the toxic things on social media because there can be so many. So now that we've discussed some of the mental health obstacles that college students face, whether it's stress culture or social media, we talked to Will about what we can actively do to address these issues. He gave us recommendations on how to take care of ourselves both mentally and physically.
In terms of getting mental support, a large hurdle some students face is knowing when to get help or knowing who to talk to. Here's what Will had to say about getting help.
Are you able to go to class? Are you able to get your homework done? Those kind of things. We get a lot of people that come in because they've stopped being able to do that. But I would add other things as well of, is your social functioning okay? Are you able to talk to people, hang out with people, get your needs met? Can you get out of bed in the morning? Can you, and a lot of times people are able to function totally normally and still want to talk to somebody at the counseling center. And there's really no benchmark for what that should look like. If you come in and you say, I don't know, I'm sad sometimes, that's as valid of a reason to come in for counseling as, I have crippling, life-altering depression.
Now, what happens if that doesn't work? Will says to give it a second chance and find what works for you.
And the other piece of that I would say is generally, just because it doesn't work doesn't mean there isn't a version that does work. There's no real shame in saying like, hey, I don't think this is working out, or I think I need or want something different.
I think knowing when to reach out to others in college is so hard because you're going to this new campus in a new state maybe where you don't know these people, and then finally you're meeting your friends and you're wondering, should I even tell them this? Are they going to think I'm weird? So I definitely recognize this is such a large hurdle to kind of sit down and admit to yourself that you're not okay and that you need to talk to someone.
Yeah, and then even reaching out, it's the first step, but it's usually the hardest step too, because you're like, who am I supposed to go to, right? Like where does the chain start of me trying to express my feelings, especially in a safe way that doesn't leave me feeling worse than before? It's definitely a really difficult process, and I relate to that a lot.
Yeah, and one of the things we talked to Will about was who you should be talking to. Obviously here he discusses the counseling, going to professionals, but we were also thinking about maybe knowing when to talk to a friend, knowing when to talk to a professor, a parent, someone in your life. And he kind of did have some caution, because these people may not respond well. They may not be someone you can trust. You really don't know when it comes to sensitive issues like that. And that's not to say you shouldn't reach out to them, especially if you have friends that you're really close to or a professor that you've known for a long time. Then someone like that might be appropriate to reach out to. But I think Will really stressed getting professional help. And like we're saying, that's a really big hurdle. That's a really drastic step it can feel like. But like Vitia said, it's the first step, and it really gets easier. I think once you take that first step.
Yeah, and I think it's worth noting that sometimes that first step isn't always going to be effective. I think about my own journey with my mental health, and the first time I had walked into a counseling center, my experience didn't go the way I wanted, right? Like I didn't feel supported or things that I was looking forward to. And at the time, I thought, okay, well, this didn't work out for me. So clearly, getting that type of professional help isn't good for me, right? Like it's not what I need. I'm just going to walk away from it. But Will mentioning, hey, the best thing you can do is advocate for yourself and, really try to communicate and find a means of help that works for you was something that I think a lot of us might know, but it may seem daunting, right? To advocate for yourself and to vocalize what you need and what's not working for you, but that is an option. And I think it's worth noting that just because one step of your mental health journey wasn't smooth or didn't meet up to your expectations or help you doesn't mean that it's time to pause on your journey or that, you're not ever going to feel the support that you need or want.
Yeah, I'm so glad you brought that up because I feel like a lot of people, when they hear counseling center, they have this idea in their mind that, oh, I can't go unless I have some severe symptom. I need to go, you need to have depression or severe anxiety or suicidal thoughts to go to a counseling center when that's not true. If you're just feeling sad, if you're just feeling stressed, that's a good enough reason to go see someone, to go talk to someone. You don't need to be in this severe state of mind to reach out to people. And that's something that Will mention too is, just because you don't look like someone else who's coming into a counseling center, that doesn't mean that you're going to get the same treatment. Maybe you'll just see a certain person a different number of times than a person with more severe symptoms, right? Like it's just a counseling is a process that's tailored towards you. And it's not like they only offer this one thing that works for everyone. Like it's perfectly fine to address a concern that you might think is not even that bad.
Yeah, I think in a lot of ways, the way we talk about mental health would be improved if we talked about it more similar to the way we talk about physical health. And I think while we're on the topic of getting professional help, I think I'll frame it that way that, think of if you had some sort of injury, right? If you were just walking around and your knee was hurting you, okay, maybe you wouldn't go to a doctor right away, but if it kind of persisted, you would probably go get it checked out at least, right? And think about it in two ways, right? Maybe you go to the doctor, they check it out, maybe there's something wrong and they prescribe you something and it's fine and you never go to the doctor again. You went once and that was it. But sometimes you go and it's something worse and maybe you have to go a few times and you have to, keep getting it checked on and that's fine too. It just depends on what you have and you go to get help for it. It makes sense. It's the natural response. And I think with mental health, for whatever reason, we don't think about it the same way. We think about like, oh, it's not bad enough. Yeah. Just like Rena was saying, but it's sometimes you go for one counseling session and that's enough. And it's really helpful. And sometimes maybe you need to go more often, but it's all about just recognizing the flexibility and the variability in the ways that these services can kind of help you and help different people in different situations.
Yeah. And I think to your point, Eric, something that I remember my high school teacher had told me about, how people view mental health really stuck with me is that when it comes to physical injuries or issues, right? For most of it, you can see it from the outside and it leaves like, very visible traces. And it's easier to seek help and it's more normalized because it's on the outside. But with mental health, because it's on the inside, and typically it's an internal battle and an internal struggle and it's personalized and people might not be able to see it, that's what makes it harder to seek that treatment and have that help and treatment appear stigmatized because it's on the inside. Like nobody sees it on the outside. And I mean, now there's tons of research that shows you how your mental health is linked to, your physical health in a very close and deeply connected way. But all that to say that because it's more of an internal struggle more often than not, it's easy to isolate this area of our well-being and not treat it as a priority, because as a society we've conditioned this idea of, oh, we just have to like pick up and move on and adapt and do all these things, when sometimes that's not the solution. And that exact mentality of forcing yourself to move on and adapt is what's going to ultimately cause your downfall, both mentally and physically. So I think it's a good point to remember.
Yeah, I think it relates to kind of the questions Will was framing. And these kind of are like very physical, visible representations, right? And I think it's interesting that, we don't consider these as valid. If you're not able to go to class, that's one of the things you said. If you can't get your homework done, if you're not going out with your friends as often as you used to, these are signs that something's wrong, and we don't treat it that way as much. Maybe the right people will be a little concerned. That's good. That's really helpful. But maybe people will look at it as he's being lazy, or he's not applying himself, or maybe he doesn't like us anymore. That's why he's not hanging out with us. And it can be hard. It can be hard when you see someone else going through that. And that happens sometimes. There can be times when a close friend comes to you with their problems. And we talked to Will about this. Here's what he had to say.
Really, honestly, the best thing you can do is listen and be there and try to understand, because maybe you won't. Maybe they'll say something to you that's so out of your experience that you'll just be like, I don't know what even to tell you. But that's the thing, is that your job as somebody's friend isn't to know exactly what to tell them or to like heal them in some miraculous way in mental health, right? Your job is to listen and to be there for them.
I mean, I'm definitely guilty of trying to at least try to solve people's problems for them, or trying to pull out every life advice I know of from the book and trying to like tell it to them and thinking it's going to help, when often they just want to be heard, right? Like it's so, again, I think it has to go with this aspect of control that we were talking about way earlier in the episode, right? When someone comes to you with a problem, I can only speak on my behalf, but it's almost like, oh, let me like try to control your life circumstances just a little bit by telling you things that I think will help you, or trying to even talk about myself to show you that you're not alone. But sometimes in the thick of that conversation, it rubs off in a completely different way than what you've intended, right? And I think what Will was saying really, brings up the point where like sometimes all you need to do is just listen and see where it goes and have them tell you what their needs are.
Yeah, I think it's really easy to put this expectation on ourselves that in order to be a good friend, we need to like solve all their problems, but we need to recognize that there's sometimes when you just don't know, what they're going through. There's no way to 100% empathize with what the person is telling you. So I definitely agree. Just listening to them, asking, what their needs are, and maybe that is giving advice. But if it's not, then yeah, just sitting down, listening with them, providing that moral support is really important.
Yeah, and I think that's so key, because really anyone can do it. It doesn't take a special kind of it takes a good friend, but it doesn't take any special skills or extraordinary experiences to be able to just listen to what your friend has to say to you. And it's important to note that a part of listening isn't necessarily understanding. Will says we can try to understand, but the reality is, even if you're listening, even if you're doing everything you can, it may just not be out of your experience. If you're someone who's neurotypical and someone's coming to you and saying, hey, my brain is telling me all these nasty things about myself and nothing I do like seems to work to get it to go away. If you're like, I've never had that. That sounds crazy. What do you mean your brain's telling you things? Like, I control my brain. It may just be so out of your experience, and it's just something you don't understand. And that doesn't make you a bad person. Doesn't make you a bad friend, like Rena's saying. It's just, it's not your job. Your job is, they're coming to you. So clearly they want you to listen to them, and you can do that. So do that. And unless you really have a good experience, you can relate to it, or unless you are super qualified, then don't pressure yourself to go beyond that. And even I would argue you probably shouldn't go beyond that, for their well-being as well. And another thing is that on the topic of kind of experiences, this is why it's so important to get professional help, because right when I go to my friend, especially if they're someone around my age, all they have is their life experience, really. Maybe they've picked up some stuff from other people they met along the way, but they can only really speak from what they've gone through, the problems they've gone through, what's worked for them. But the reality is professionals literally spend all day, every day, sitting and listening to people's problems and helping them with their problems. And they spent a good chunk of their lives studying people's problems. And they're going to be able to listen to you. They're going to be able to understand your problem or your friend's problem and, actually give you a range of solutions. Or maybe they'll already know and they'll know really what does work in this situation. And that's the reality, is that a random friend just doesn't have that experience, and that's the real value in going to a professional.
So in addition to reaching out to others, we often hear self-care, which is marketed as this tactic to improve your mental health, but a lot of people have misconceptions about what self-care actually is. So when we talked to Will about self-care, he explained the benefits of it and how to better improve its uses.
I think overall, I think anything can be self-care. And I think there's lots of really wonderful things out there that are like, here are just enjoyable activities, and any of these can be self-care. So sometimes I would talk to people about it being less about what the specific activity is and more about how you're using it. So using self-care activities to avoid work or to avoid your responsibilities is not self-care.
I think this term self-care is really funny because every time I go on Instagram and find a self-care account, it's literally just like soap and bath products. And for some reason, even Will mentioned this, like self-care is not taking a bubble bath 5 times a day. I'm not sure why self-care is like connected to bathing, but yeah, self-care can be anything, right? Will said his self-care is video games. Maybe yours can be spending time with a friend or your pet. Like you just really have to, again, with a lot of other things that we mentioned, just try to find what works for you.
Yeah. And then again, we're going back to this constant theme of being honest with yourself and being mindful and reflecting on what the purpose of the activity is, right? Will was mentioning, if you're using self-care activities to avoid work, that's a bit of a problem that you need to address with yourself, right? Like not using self-care as an excuse to, further deepen the problems that you're having with yourself and your environment. And that is such a fine line that again is very difficult to, work around and be honest with. But I'm really glad he mentioned it because I feel like on social media, I've seen very polar opposite arguments for and against self-care, with some people, saying self-care isn't X, Y, or Z, and really being strict on defining what self-care is, and some people being very clear advocates for it, and other people saying it's nothing but a waste of time.
Yeah, I think it's so hard for us to kind of talk about this line, this kind of balancing act, because everyone's at different points, right? There are a lot of people at a place like Hopkins who are like, I don't have time to even take a bath or hang out with friends or take a nap, anything, right? They just want to work, work, work. And those are the people who, we're sitting here talking about like, please do some self-care, take care of yourself, take a break, relax. You're only hurting yourself by kind of doing what you're doing. But then, I bet there's plenty of listeners out there who are on the other end of the spectrum who are, sitting there, I don't know, yeah, taking their 5th bubble bath of the day while their essays are, wasting away on the computer. And, they'll email the professor, hey, sorry, I had a rough day, couldn't do it, and it's just, those are the people who you need to caution, and you need to say, hey, this isn't actually helping you. This is hurting you. And that's why it's really hard for us to give advice. It's really, you need to take it upon yourself. You need to make sure that you're taking time for yourself and for your responsibilities. And that's the balancing act you need to strike. So while we're talking about things that, work to make us feel better, to enable us to address our problems, 3 things that we kept hearing come up over and over again: nutrition, exercise, and mindfulness. These are always prescribed for mental health issues. And so we asked Will what he thought about them and how effective they actually are.
The joke in a lot of psychology centers is that mindfulness works for everything. But things like nutrition and exercise, there's a lot of really powerful stuff out there that suggests that if we can get ourselves to do it, that it makes a big difference. What we put in our bodies, how we exercise, all of that. But you also note that you don't have to do all of them, that you don't have to like be a perfect being who has great nutrition and exercises all the time and meditates. You can do one. You can do whatever is reasonable for your life.
I think what's hard about hearing these things all the time is that we just kind of get numb to them. Like, yeah, I know I'm supposed to eat well, I know I'm supposed to exercise, whatever. And then we don't do them. Or maybe we do try them and then they're not an overnight fix and then we stop. So, yeah, definitely self-care in general on top of, nutrition, exercise, mindfulness, it takes time to build up these habits and actually have an impact to you in the long term.
Yeah, and I think something Will mentioned was that you don't have to overdo it. If people are telling you that you should be exercising more for your mental health, that doesn't mean you spend 2 hours in the gym every day and you need to be jacked out of your mind or anything like this. It's just a walk, a jog, even just getting up, moving from your chair, walking around the room, walking around the house. It goes such a long way. And I think we underrate it a lot.
Yeah, I definitely relate to what you're saying, Eric, because especially right now, while we're still in the pandemic and everything is virtual, just taking out 15 to 20 minutes out of my day to just walk outside and put some music in and not really worry about what's left for me at my desk has been incredibly rewarding at just clearing up all the clutter in my head and making me feel grounded and centered. And it's crazy because it's only 20 minutes out of my day that's really changing the course of the rest of my day and the tone for how, I feel both internally and externally. So it's nice to know that when we talk about things like nutrition, exercise, mindfulness, like you were saying, Eric, they don't have to be these drastic measures or missions that you have to accomplish every day. It can be little things that help build up the habit of knowing that you're not confined to your work or your to-do list or whatever it may be.
Yeah, and I think it's important to be realistic here because we're here sitting talking about mental health, but I'll be honest, like I have not been exercising very much at all during the pandemic. My nutrition has gotten a little bit better, but I'm still eating junk food plenty of the time. It's not, we're not these perfect beacons of health, and the reality is no one is. And it's like Will says, it's not necessary to be perfect. Doing one of these things can help. Doing a little bit of these things can help. And it shouldn't be something that adds more pressure to your life. It shouldn't be something that stresses you out and makes you feel worse about yourself. These are tools. These are tools to help you. And just like any other tool, you should use them in the way that is most useful.
So I want to touch on the word mindfulness because I hear this all the time and I often don't really know what it means. Like maybe it's just sitting there reflecting on my day. But I feel like it's much more than that. What do you guys think mindfulness is?
Yeah, I actually did want to touch on that. When we talk about mindfulness and meditation, it's very strange. Like I think everyone has tried to exercise. Everyone took a gym class in high school. Everyone, knows what they eat. They're at least somewhat conscious about what they put in their body. And those things are so basic, so general in life. But like meditation or even just mindfulness are these very weird kind of things. And yet Will says, mindfulness works for everything, which is kind of funny. But I think mindfulness, kind of what you're alluding to, Rena, it doesn't have to be meditation. It doesn't have to be sitting there. For me, sometimes I practice mindfulness just walking, which then again mixes in that exercise. I go for a walk. I say, I'm not going to think about what I have to do later today. I'm not going to think about what I've already done today. I'm just going to look at the trees, look at the people walking by, maybe listen to the music I'm listening to very consciously. And it's really powerful. Just taking like 30 minutes and you're not stressed. It's weird, but it's this very rewarding practice. And it is something, again, that is kind of something you have to build. It's like a muscle you have to build over time, because it's hard to say like, I have a project due tonight, I'm just going to forget about it for 30 minutes. Like that's a hard thing to do. But it really goes a long way. And again, it doesn't have to be this weird conscious meditative thing. It can be whatever works for you, whatever is able to kind of distract you a little bit.
You know, your mental health journey isn't linear, right? Like some days are going to be better than others and some days are not going to be that great. And, you know, maybe nutrition, exercise, mindfulness exercises, they're all going to work to different capacities based on the seasons of your life, right? But I think the main message that we're trying to get at is to encourage you to not give up on these habits, right? Because that consistency can go such a long way. I mean, like Eric was saying, we're not professionals in mental health and we don't know what you're going through personally at any point of when you're listening to this episode. But our purpose is to help you really just reflect on how you're doing and if you're doing okay and what you can do if the answer happens to be no. We hope that this episode empowered you to think about the various perspectives in improving your mental health as a college student to make informed health decisions. For more information about accessing mental health services, please visit our website withthepodcast.com. To share your thoughts and interact with us, follow us on Instagram at with_thepodcast. We appreciate your support immensely, and thank you to Mr. Will Nation for taking the time to talk with us. We hope you'll join us for our next episode soon.